It was a scorching Thursday afternoon in early June, the kind that makes asphalt shimmer and tools burn your fingertips. In the small town of Blanco, Texas, population just under 2,000, most people were tucked indoors with their fans on high, trying to escape the sweltering heat. But not Matt Greaves. He was elbow deep under the hood of a rusted-out '92 Ford F-150, trying to convince its starter motor to come back from the dead. Matt wasn't a mechanic by trade. He dropped out of college a few years back, tried to make ends meet doing odd jobs, roofing, hauling scrap, fixing up old appliances. Cars were just one of those things he'd picked up from his dad before he passed. It was the kind of skill you didn't list on a resume, but it paid when a IC broke in someone's car or the radiator blew halfway down Route 281. He wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his grease-covered hand and glanced at his watch. 3:43 p.m. He had promised Mrs. Langley he'd be over to fix her leaky sink by 4, but the truck wasn't cooperating. With a sigh, he dropped his wrench, slammed the hood shut, and tossed his gloves on the driver's seat. That's when he noticed the vehicle. A sleek, obsidian black Mercedes Maybach, easily worth more than all the cars Matt had ever owned combined, was parked haphazardly along the side of the road about 30 feet from his driveway. At first glance, it looked like one of those expensive rentals you see rich tourists driving through hill country. Guys try to relive their 20s, except now with Rolexes and receding hairlines. But this one had a flat front tire, and judging by the way the driver was pacing, phone in hand, it wasn't part of some joyride. Matt squinted against the sunlight. The man wore a navy polo shirt tucked into khaki pants, and though he tried to blend in, there was something about him, posture, presence, energy, that stood out. His bald head glinted in the sun. Matt thought he looked familiar. Real familiar. He sauntered closer, curiosity piqued. When he got within earshot, the man was muttering into the phone, clearly agitated. Yeah, I know I didn't schedule anything. It was supposed to be a quiet day, and then bam, tire pressure warning, and now I'm stuck in the middle of nowhere. No, I don't need a helicopter. Jesus, stop overreacting. I just need a damn tire change. The voice. Matt's jaw slackened slightly. That voice was unmistakable. He'd heard it in countless interviews, business conferences, and TED Talks. It was Jeff Bezos. The Jeff Bezos. Matt hesitated. Was it an impersonator? A lookalike doing a prank video? No. The closer he looked, the more he realized this wasn't a joke. The voice, the facial structure, the aura, that was definitely the billionaire founder of Amazon, casually stranded on the side of a dusty Texas road. Matt cleared his throat. You need a hand? Bezos looked up, eyes scanning Matt like a security scanner. Yeah, flat tire. My phone's got no signal, and I'd rather not wait 3 hours for roadside. Matt nodded. I got a jack and some tools in the shed. Won't take long. You got a spare? Bezos looked relieved. Yeah, in the trunk. Without another word, Matt jogged back, grabbed his hydraulic jack and impact wrench, and returned to the car. He didn't ask any questions. Didn't pull out his phone to take a picture. Didn't gawk. Just got down on one knee and started loosening lug nuts like it was any other day. You do this often? Bezos asked after a few minutes of silence. Often enough, Matt replied. Town's small, and a lot of tow trucks. Where'd you learn? My old man. Used to run a body shop down near Wimberley. Bezos nodded. Solid skill to have, especially around here. They chatted a bit more. Nothing too deep. Just small talk about the weather, the heat, how Tesla's new tires weren't as durable as advertised. Bezos offered to pay Matt, but Matt shook his head. Forget it. You're stranded. I want someone to help me out too. But Bezos wasn't the kind to forget gestures like that. A month later, Matt got a letter, real paper, with gold embossed lettering, thanking him for the help. Inside was a first-class round-trip ticket to Seattle and a note. If you're ever in town, I'd like to buy you dinner. Matt thought it was a gag. He nearly tossed it out. But after some thought, and at the insistence of his friend Jeremy, who had a deep obsession with Amazon stock prices, he booked the flight. When Matt arrived in Seattle, a black Lincoln was waiting for him at the airport. It drove him straight to an unmarked building in South Lake Union. No fanfare, no press, just a man in a hoodie and jeans waiting at the door with a coffee in hand. Bezos greeted him with a handshake. Matt, right? Glad you came. They walked through what looked like an R&D facility. Whiteboards filled with equations. Engineers hunched over prototypes. In the center of the building was a massive warehouse filled with robotic arms assembling strange devices. Bezos gave Matt the tour himself, explaining projects and development. Nothing sci-fi, just smart logistics, new ways to automate storage, even a biodegradable packaging machine. Matt didn't understand half of it, but he nodded politely. At dinner, a modest Italian joint Bezos apparently loved for its zero media footprint, the conversation took a turn. You ever think about doing more with your skills? Bezos asked between bites of linguine. Matt shrugged. Not really. Just trying to keep the lights on. You're sharp, Bezos said. Not just with your hands. With people. I noticed that. Matt didn't know what to say. No one had ever called him sharp before. Not like that. A few weeks later, Matt received a job offer. Not a cushy tech job. Nothing corporate. Bezos wanted him to head a new division. Amazon's Mobile Mechanical Response Unit, an experimental project for rural logistics support. Fixing drones in the field. Servicing last-mile electric vans. Training mechanics in underdeveloped regions. It was crazy, but Matt said yes. Over the next 2 years, Matt traveled to 9 states, trained over 300 people, and built a network of roadside response units that kept Amazon deliveries flowing even in places where cell service didn't exist. He even got his own team, guys like him from small towns, good with their hands and great with people. One day, at a regional conference in Kansas City, Bezos showed up unannounced. No entouraje, just him and his assistant. He pulled Matt aside. You know, he said, when you changed that tire, I thought you were just a guy being nice. But you saw a problem and fixed it without hesitation. That's rare. It's what built this company. Matt didn't say much, just smiled. By the time he turned 35, Matt wasn't rich, not by Bezos standards, but he had equity in the logistics startup Bezos had spun out of the project. He bought a house for his mom, restored his dad's old garage into a community auto workshop, and funded scholarships for 3 local teens who wanted to go into the trades. He still changed tires when folks broke down in Blanco. Not because he had to, but because it was just who he was. And if you drove through that part of Texas today, you might still spot him under the hood of someone's truck, humming a tune, hands black with grease, smiling like a man who never needed millions to feel successful, but somehow ended up changing the world just because he stopped to help a guy on the side of the road. And that guy just happened to be Jeff Bezos. Not long after Matt's story made quiet waves through Amazon's internal circles, it began to leak out. Not through press releases or social media posts, but by word of mouth from employees and regional team leaders who worked with him. People were fascinated. Who was this small-town guy without a LinkedIn page, leading a logistics revolution from the cab of a dusty pickup truck? Journalists sniffed around. Podcasts reached out. A few local news stations ran pieces, but Matt stayed out of the spotlight. Not my thing, he'd say. He didn't chase fame. He still lived in the same house in Blanco, still ate at Martha's Diner every Wednesday morning, and still refused to wear a suit unless he was at a funeral or a wedding. But what really shocked people, including Bezos himself, came during the wildfire season the following year. That summer, a series of fast-moving wildfires tore through rural Colorado. Back roads became impassable, power lines went down, and entire communities were cut off from food and supplies. Aid was slow to arrive, and the National Guard couldn't access many of the mountainous routes. Matt saw it unfolding on the news and didn't hesitate. He called in every contact he'd made through the Amazon pilot program. Within 24 hours, he'd assembled a fleet of retrofitted delivery vans, off-road trucks, and drone units. They used the same lightweight mobile repair stations he'd designed, just modified for emergency relief instead of logistics. He and his team got to Colorado before the first wave of federal responders. They didn't wait for instructions. They built temporary supply lines from scratch, repairing washed-out paths, repurposing drone tech to deliver water and insulin to isolated cabins. Local sheriffs were stunned. One even called Matt a backcountry MacGyver with the heart of a first responder. When Bezos heard what was happening, he was floored. He hadn't even known the team was still operational at that scale. He called Matt directly, voice a mix of pride and disbelief. You turned a logistics project into a crisis response unit. Do you even realize what you just did? Matt just laughed. Didn't do it alone. The story blew up. The New York Times called him the fixer of Blanco. CNN ran a piece titled, "The Guy Who Quietly Outworked FEMA." Overnight, the man who once lived paycheck to paycheck was on the radar of everyone from disaster response NGOs to the Pentagon. But Matt didn't care about the buzz. He just cared that his trucks had made it through, and no one had died waiting for help. After the fires, Bezos invited Matt to a private summit in Aspen. It wasn't publicized, just a gathering of innovators, former generals, logistics experts, and policymakers. The topic? Redesigning emergency response for the 21st century. Matt sat at the table in a faded denim jacket, while everyone else wore sport coats and lanyards. He didn't bring a presentation. No slides. No jargon. Just stories. He talked about how rural America gets overlooked in crisis planning. How one well-trained person with the right tools can change an entire outcome. He talked about trust. How locals are more likely to listen to someone they know than a stranger in uniform. When he finished, the room went silent. Then they applauded. Later that night, Bezos pulled him aside. "I want you to build this into something bigger." Matt didn't answer right away. He looked out at the mountains, then said, "I'll do it, but we do it my way. No suits, no bloat. Real work, real people." And that's exactly what happened. The following year, Matt became the founder and CEO of a new independent nonprofit called GridLink, funded in part by Amazon, but completely autonomous. Its mission: to build decentralized, locally led emergency tech teams across the country. They hired ranchers, welders, mechanics, farmers, people who knew their land and their neighbors. Each team had vehicles, drones, and mobile repair units stationed and maintained year-round. Within 2 years, GridLink responded to tornadoes in Oklahoma, hurricanes in Louisiana, and floods in Kentucky, often arriving faster than state agencies. It wasn't magic. It was just smart people given trust and tools, doing what they did best. And through all of it, Matt stayed on the ground. He was never comfortable behind a desk. He kept a beat-up toolbox in the back of his truck and still personally responded to calls when he could. There's a now famous photo of him waist-deep in floodwater in Mississippi, lifting a school kid out of a stalled bus with one arm, holding a two-way radio in the other. Time magazine used it for their cover story, "The Billionaire's Mechanic Who Rewired America's Response System." But Matt never called himself a hero. When asked about the photo in an interview, he chuckled and said, "I just didn't want the kid to ruin his sneakers." Despite his reluctance for the spotlight, offers poured in, speaking gigs, honorary degrees, even a position on a national advisory board. He turned down most of them, except for one thing: a public school initiative. He started a nationwide vocational training program called Hands First, bringing auto repair, electrical work, and mechanical training back into high schools, especially in rural and underfunded districts. "Not everyone needs to code," he'd say. "Some of us are born to build, to fix, to move things forward with our hands." By 2030, Hands First was in 19 states, with thousands of students graduating directly into jobs that paid well above the national average. Companies fought to hire them. They were sharp, resourceful, and trained in real-world conditions. And every year, Matt would travel to a few of those schools himself, stand in the back of the class, and just watch, a quiet reminder that it all started with one act of kindness on a dusty Texas road. To this day, Matt Greaves remains one of the most unlikely but impactful figures in modern logistics in emergency planning. No tech background, no fancy degree, just a guy who knew how to turn a wrench and decided to help someone without asking for anything in return. As for Bezos, he once said in a rare interview, "All the algorithms in the world won't save you when your tire blows out in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes, all you need is a guy like Matt, and we need a lot more Matts." So the next time you hear one of those wild internet headlines, "Random guy fixed Jeff Bezos' car," what he got will shock you. Just know it's not clickbait, because sometimes the truth is even more unbelievable than fiction. Matt Greaves didn't plan for any of it. He didn't even own a passport until he was nearly 40. But 5 years after launching GridLink and transforming domestic emergency response, the international calls started coming in. It began with a quiet inquiry from a logistics director working in Guatemala, where landslides had destroyed infrastructure and blocked entire regions from receiving food or medical supplies. They'd heard about what Matt and his teams were doing in rural America and asked, not for a donation, not for media attention, just for advice. Matt didn't hesitate. He flew down himself, spent 3 weeks in country with a translator and 2 local engineers, helping them modify vehicles to handle washed out terrain, showing them how to set up portable repair bays, and most importantly, teaching them how to train people with limited resources but unlimited grit. That visit sparked a cascade. Over the next 3 years, Matt and a rotating crew of GridLink volunteers visited over a dozen countries, from Indonesia to Kenya, Haiti to Bolivia, each place presenting a new challenge, a new way to adapt his simple but powerful model. He never came in like a savior. He listened, observed, and built relationships. That was Matt's gift, not just fixing machines, but building trust. In rural Malawi, a woman named Sarah Bonda, once a midwife and mother of 5, became one of GridLink's first certified mechanical trainers outside the U.S. She later led the response team that kept 2 hospitals running during a regional power crisis, using solar-charged mobile units and battery packs Matt's team had helped design. When she sent Matt a picture of her team, grease-streaked and smiling in front of a makeshift workshop, he printed it and taped it above his desk back home. By then, Matt had reluctantly accepted a new title, Global Director of Field Operations. He still refused to wear a tie. Despite his growing influence, Matt stayed grounded. He never upgraded from his modest house in Blanco, though the garage had expanded into a full-blown innovation workshop, affectionately nicknamed the Greaves Lab by his team. Engineers, field workers, and thinkers from around the world came through it, working on everything from modular drone hubs to portable water filtration systems built from common auto parts. At one point, a billionaire philanthropist tried to donate $100 million to GridLink. Matt declined. "Put half into training programs in underserved areas," he said. "Use the other half to pay local mechanics more. They're the ones doing the real work." That move earned him a strange kind of legend status, not just in aid circles, but in business communities where people still debated whether Matt was the most underleveraged genius in America. He didn't care. As long as the work got done, the rest didn't matter. And then came a call that would change everything again. It was from a private security firm operating in northern India, working with disaster recovery teams near the Himalayas. A devastating glacier burst had wiped out roads, trapped entire villages, and knocked out comms infrastructure. They tried to fly in supplies by helicopter, but the altitudes and weather made it nearly impossible. "Can you do something?" they asked. Matt didn't answer right away. But within 48 hours, a convoy of modified GridLink vehicles, stripped down to handle cold, high altitude, and uneven terrain, was airlifted in pieces by cargo plane to the nearest staging area. Matt went with them. They rebuilt snowmobile hybrids from delivery vans, retrofitted with solar assist kits and traction-modified treads. They set up signal relay towers powered by car batteries and salvage scrap. Within a week, aid was flowing in. Within 2, villages were reconnected. International agencies that had ignored GridLink before now scrambled to study their methods. The UN quietly invited Matt to Geneva for a closed-door strategy session. When he spoke, representatives from 3 continents took notes. He was offered advisory roles, honorary positions, even a seat on a global disaster response council. He declined most of it. Instead, he launched what would become his final major initiative, the Fix Forward Fellowship, a global mentorship and deployment program for young tradespeople from rural and underserved regions around the world. It was part training, part apprenticeship, and part leadership development. These weren't just mechanics. They were future community leaders taught how to organize, respond, and build. At the first Fix Forward Summit, held in a converted bar near Blanco, over 100 young leaders from 30 countries came to shake Matt's hand. One by one, they told their stories of roads rebuilt, villages reconnected, lives saved. Matt sat on a folding chair in the back, quietly wiping away tears. Years later, one of those fellows, a Syrian refugee named Ayman, would go on to lead a groundbreaking infrastructure project across refugee camps in Jordan, integrating GridLink's mobile tech into long-term rebuilding. He would later win a major international peace award and dedicate it to the guy from Texas who taught me how to think with my hands. And what about Jeff Bezos? Bezos and Matt remained close, though rarely in the public eye. Bezos had long since stepped away from the day-to-day of Amazon, focusing on space, sustainability, and personal ventures. But every year, without fail, he sent Matt a handwritten letter on the anniversary of that flat tire. One of them read, "You helped me when I had nothing to offer, and then you helped the world. I only gave you a plane ticket. You gave back an entire system that works." Matt never replied, but he kept the letters in a small cedar box next to his workbench, under a rusted socket wrench his father had left him. When Matt Greaves finally retired, not with a press conference, but by quietly handing over his keys and saying, "You got this now," the world took notice. Documentaries were made. Books were written. Presidents quoted him, but he never let it get to his head. In fact, when the town of Blanco tried to rename Main Street after him, he told them flat out no. "You want to honor me?" he said. "Fix the potholes." So they did. Today, his legacy lives on not in gold statues or corporate towers, but in the hundreds of mobile workshops dotting the globe, in the millions of people better off because one guy saw a problem and didn't wait for permission to fix it. And it all started because one hot summer afternoon in Texas, a regular guy saw a car on the side of the road and didn't hesitate to help. So when someone tells you a story with a crazy title like "Random Guy Fixed Jeff Bezos' Car," what he got will shock you. Believe them, because sometimes the shock isn't in the reward. It's in how far one good act can go. In the years that followed Matt's quiet retirement, GridLink continued to grow, now led by a diverse council of former trainees and regional leaders Matt had personally mentored. They expanded into climate resilience, retrofitting homes, schools, and clinics with modular systems that could survive floods, fires, blackouts, and droughts. They weren't just responding to disasters anymore. They were preparing people for the ones yet to come. Matt, though, he disappeared from the headlines. Not because anything happened, he just faded back in his life the same way he'd entered the world's view in the first place, quietly doing something useful. He went back to fixing cars in his garage, not for money, just for the neighbors. He'd leave receipts handwritten in pencil with a note, "Pay what feels right," or "Bring me pie." His yard filled again with projects, an old riding mower, a half-built dune buggy, a wood-burning stove he'd been tinkering with for 5 winters straight. But every so often, people would still come to find him. Sometimes it was a former student. Sometimes a journalist who refused to believe a man like that could just vanish back into small-town America. Sometimes it was a mother or father who wanted their kid to meet the guy who saved our town that one summer. Matt never turned anyone away. He'd sit with them on his porch, drink coffee, talk about carburetors and courage, sometimes both in the same breath. One day, a young girl, no older than 10, came with her father. She had a binder full of drawings, trucks with wings, flying mechanic robots, mobile water tanks shaped like beetles. She wanted to be an inventor, she said. Matt looked through her pages like it was the most important thing he'd done all week. When she asked him how to build one of them, he smiled and said, "Start with what you already have. If it moves, it works. If it breaks, you'll learn." That moment, caught on video by her dad, went viral a week later. Millions of views, thousands of comments. The world remembered Matt all over again. There were calls for new awards, new monuments, even a streaming series based on his life. Matt refused everyone, but he did make one rare public statement in a grainy webcam interview for a youth mechanical club. He said, "Look, I'm not special. I'm just a guy who decided that a broken thing wasn't the end of the story. The end is what you make of it. If something's busted, you don't wait around. You roll up your sleeves. That's how the world gets fixed, one bolt at a time." Eventually, the story of Matt Greaves became something more than a news cycle or a quirky headline. It became a legend, not a myth, but the kind of legend that lives in truth. Schools told his story. Workshops hung his quotes above the door. Aid groups rebuilt their entire approach based on his field notes. And thousands of everyday people, mechanics, teachers, drivers, welders, farmers, saw in him a kind of permission to believe that what they did mattered, that they didn't have to be rich or famous to make a difference. Matt's legacy wasn't measured in money or titles or media attention. It was measured in people who now believe that they, too, could change something starting right where they were. And that was the real shock. Not that he fixed Jeff Bezos' car, but that he fixed something much bigger in the process. The idea that regular folks can't do extraordinary things. Because if a random guy on a dusty Texas highway can change the way the world responds to disaster, then maybe the next world-changing story starts with you, too. Years later, when Matt Greaves passed away quietly in his sleep at the age of 72, the world paused. There were no state funerals, no masiperas, just silence, the kind that follows someone whose impact runs deeper than headlines. But something unusual happened. In over 40 countries, hundreds of mobile service units, the kind Matt had helped design, went offline for exactly 1 hour. Trucks stopped. Workshops closed. Drones landed. Not because someone ordered it, but because people everywhere decided that for 1 hour, they would honor the man who taught them what it meant to serve quietly and with purpose. In Blanco, Texas, the church overflowed. Mechanics flew in from Italy, Kenya, Peru, India, and Iceland, people who had only met Matt once, or never in person, but who owed their livelihoods, and sometimes their lives, to something he'd built or taught. There was no eulogy from a president or billionaire. Instead, the mayor, who had once been a teenage dropout Matt convinced to learn welding, read a letter Matt had left behind. It was typed, barely a page long. It read, "Don't remember me for what I built. Remember what we fixed together. Don't build statues. Build trust. Don't chase big. Fix what's small until it grows. And if you ever see someone broken down on the side of the road, stop." After that day, a quiet movement began. People started pulling over more often. Not just in Blanco, but in towns and cities across the world. People fixed things they might have thrown away. They mentored strangers. They volunteered in places that rarely made the news. They told their kids about the guy who just stopped to help. A mechanic in Cairo hung Matt's picture in his shop. A high school in Argentina renamed its auto shop the Greaves Garage. A woman in Ohio, whose life had been saved by a drone Matt's team designed, started a scholarship fund for girls in STEM called Fix Forward. And somewhere, in the middle of nowhere, really, a father told his son the now legendary story. The one that began with a random flat tire and ended up rewriting how the world sees ordinary people. The boy asked, "Did that really happen?" The father smiled and replied, "Most of it. And the rest? Well, sometimes stories that should be true become true because we believe them enough to live like they are." And so, the legend of Matt Greaves lived on, not carved in stone, but engraved into the lives of millions of people who fixed something, helped someone, or simply remembered to stop when it mattered. So the next time you scroll past a headline like, "Random guy fixed Jeff Bezos' car," what he got will shock you. Don't laugh, because what he got wasn't money or a company or a title. He got to change the world. And all he had to do was stop. And while the world continued to move faster, louder, and more connected than ever, there remained small pockets of stillness, of people who remembered. A quiet garage in Blanco kept its doors open, now run by a few of Matt's old apprentices. They didn't advertise. There was no sign, but folks always knew where to go. The kind of people who couldn't afford dealership prices, who were stuck between jobs, or just needed someone to say, "Yeah, I can help with that." The Greaves name was never trademarked, never slapped on a chain of stores, never monetized. You couldn't buy it, but you could carry it. And that's exactly what people did. All over the world, mechanics and builders and volunteers would leave little marks in Matt's honor. A single bolt on a workbench painted blue, his favorite color. A handwritten sign above a tool rack that read, "Don't wait for permission." A coffee mug on a shelf that said, "Fix forward." It was never organized, never branded. It was just how they remembered a man who showed them that even the smallest actions, a tightened bolt, a lifted hood, a spare part shared, could ripple outward in ways you might never live to see. Years later, a best-selling book would be written by someone who had once been a kid in a flooded town, watching Matt's convoy roll in with tools and light and warmth. The book was titled, "The Man Who Stopped." It wasn't about a billionaire. It wasn't about machines. It was about a moment, a decision. A man who pulled over on a hot day, not knowing the driver he was helping was Jeff Bezos, not caring, just doing what needed to be done. And that, in the end, was the shock. That changing the world didn't take genius, or money, or fame. It just took a moment, and a willingness to stop. In the end, there was no statue of Matt Greaves, no skyscraper bearing his name, no luxury yacht or billionaire lifestyle. Just a story, passed along from mouth to mouth, screen to screen, hand to hand. A story that sounded too simple to be true, too good to be real. A man sees a car on the side of the road. He pulls over. He helps. No expectations. No business card. Just one guy doing the right thing. The fact that the driver turned out to be Jeff Bezos? Sure, that's what made it viral. That's the part people clicked on. That's the shock, the twist, the irony. But the real shock? It's what came next. Because Matt didn't just fix a car. He fixed lives. He fixed systems. He fixed the idea that only the powerful could make a difference. He proved that one act, done without ego, without reward, could unlock something massive, something global. He proved that you don't need to be rich to be generous. You don't need to be famous to be remembered. And you don't need to have a plan to make a difference. You just need to start. Matt Greaves left behind no fortune, but he left behind a blueprint. Not for machines, for how to live. Work hard. Listen closely. Fix what you can. Teach others. And above all, stop. When someone needs help, stop. When something's broken, stop and look closer. When the world's flying past, stop, even if just for a moment. Because you never know what's waiting on the side of the road. It might be a stranger. It might be a future friend. It might be a billionaire. Or it might be the beginning of the biggest change of your life. And maybe someday, someone will tell your story, too, starting with something simple. Like the day you decided not to keep driving and stopped.